Thanks, everyone. I believe everyone I'm seeing here on the screen has been a part of at least the initial overall work group meeting. This is our first subcommittee meeting that's focusing on funding issues. We've already had a policy subcommittee meeting last week, February 10th, and we've scheduled our removal subcommittee for this coming Monday, the 22nd. So we're rolling right along, giving up the work and doing a couple things in the background as well to support this effort. As you all probably know me already, but I'm Jeff Floyd with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. We are co-facilitating this with Katie Register of Clean Virginia Waterways and bringing all you wonderful folks together to the table to tackle some of the tough issues surrounding this and to really get our minds wrapped around the problem, to quantify some of the removal costs, potentially some of the economic opportunity costs that are incurred by marinas and property owners, and to look at just jurisdictional issues with the regards to the limits of what the existing agencies can do to address these vessels and remove them. So this subcommittee, as given away by the title, is the funding subcommittee. So we will be diving into more detail with Katie's lead here in a couple minutes, just to go over some of the things that have come out in discussions with marina owners, some of our own research, and some of the policy subcommittee things. So one more thing that I'll say before I turn it over to Katie is just some highlights from the policy subcommittee that, again, some of you were on that call. We are looking to schedule the next meeting sometime in mid-March, so we sent out a doodle poll for that if you're interested in participating. We had the pleasure of having Major Ben Meyer, who is the North Carolina State Boating Administrator, give an overview of some of their lessons learned, and the upshot is that they were able to secure some funding to remove vessels displaced in recent hurricanes, but that the money ran out pretty quickly due to the high costs, as you probably know, of removing these vessels, and that there is an interest in proceeding and moving forward with the program, but the state legislatures don't really have the will to go and increase fees and that sort of thing to create funding. So they're a little bit of a sticking point, having had some success with local partners, but still very much learning as they go. Tom Guess of DWR and Gary Jacobs of LNG Marine Towing gave some lessons learned as well about the sticking points of the titling process and how there's a lot of liability and costs put on the contractors to remove things on vessels without having first going through the hiccups of tracking down an owner and getting the title. I know VMRC with Tony, there's a process of public noticing some vessels that may be displaced and land in someone's property through no fault of that homeowner, but still it is a lengthy and costly process. And then finally, we have Anthony Casuto with William Mary Coastal Policy Center and William Mary Law School, and he and I believe Jesse might be on as well, giving an overview of their white paper that they're working on this spring semester to do some policy proposals that could be sort of used as talking points with legislators after this work group convenes. So that's really kind of where we're at. And as you probably saw from the agenda, and Katie will discuss, we have some very specific ideas that have been brought up from owners of marinas and such. And I guess the last thing I'll say is we did get some inventory from the Coast Guard. They have a spreadsheet. It's about 170 plus vessels just in coastal waters since 2013 that they've logged. And we're currently adding to that list. Neil Sturman and others have given us some data on some vessels that we're incorporating into that larger inventory, as well as some reports on our Google Forms survey that we sent out last week, I believe, and then earlier in sort of some trial runs. So I'm working to merge those spreadsheets together and really get a good idea of the location and the size and whatever information we can glean and then start prioritizing them. So I will turn it over to Katie.
Great, thank you. Wanted to just a little bit of housekeeping in the chat box, which is down towards the middle bottom portion of your screen. Click on the chat box, and in there, please put your name and affiliation. So that's how we're going to be taking attendance. And later during the open discussion, the first time you speak, would you please give us all your name and your affiliation so that we can figure out who all's on the call. So thank you for that. So we've been speaking, as you know, to a number of other states that are in different places with their approach to dealing with abandoned and derelict vessels and how to fund them. And one of the things that we thought would be a good exercise to start with is to take a brief look at a list of what we would spend money on if we had a budget, if we had several $1,000,000. And the agenda that was sent out to you this morning shows some of the things that we've come up with by looking at other states. So this is not a definitive list, it's a starting point for discussion. And in case you don't have that agenda in front of you, I can read to you the list of things that Jeff and I determined would probably be part of the mix. So obviously, to run a robust, sustained ADV program, there would be knowledgeable staff year round. So the first item on this possible budget would be staff to run the program. And we're making an assumption based on things we heard at previous meetings that that position would probably be at the Department of Wildlife Resources. The second item on the list would be the actual removal of the vessels. Most of the states we spoke with handle this through contractors, not through their own equipment. But either way, it's a big expense. The next item is education and prevention programs. Many of the states that have such programs do spend some of their funding on education and prevention. One thing that just occurred to me that's not on this list is the possibility of a vessel turn-in program. A couple of states, California, I believe Oregon, Florida somewhat, have voluntary programs where if you have an old boat, you can turn it into one of the marinas that has a contract with the state government. And as long as you have free title and you show that you don't have any liens on the boat, the state takes care of disposal. So that should be added to this list as a possibility. Another thing that we learned, Mitchell and Jeff and I spoke with some people at Lake Anna last week or earlier this week. I don't know, this week's gone on forever. But one of the things we talked to them about is, would there, if a fee were to be put onto boaters that would go towards funding this program, how would the inland boaters, people whose boats never leave a freshwater lake, how would they feel about paying a fee? We did hear from North Carolina that there was some reluctance of the inland boaters paying for what they considered to be entirely a coastal issue. So we raised that question with the Lake Anna boaters that we spoke with, and they said that they did not feel like there'd be any resistance as long as they understood that this fund could benefit all boaters. One of the boaters said their big issue, they've got two issues in Lake Anna. One is algae blooms, which are often called HABs, harmful algae blooms. And they also have hydrilla, an invasive water plant that's growing and really messes up your propellers if you sail through it or drive through it. So that was one kind of aha when we were speaking to that boater, that perhaps a fund that's paid into by all boaters could also support some of the research that's being done on harmful algae blooms in freshwater, as well as hydrilla removal. So that might make it more acceptable to all boaters. We also asked these boaters and other boaters that we've had informal conversations with, how would they feel about an annual fee of, let's say, $10 a year that would go into a fund to deal with issues. And one fellow said he would not even blink at a $10 fee. Another woman said that when you see how much money people spend on recreational boating, not just the boat, but everything that goes with it, the restaurants and the marina fees, that $10 is such a small amount. Another guy said it's what he spends on a 6-pack of beer, and he thought that he also would not have a problem with that. So that's very informal. I mean, it's not a large sampling that we did. So one of the questions I have on this agenda is, do we feel that this committee should pursue a more formal study about attitudes of boaters towards contributing to a fee. And then the last thing on this, and then I'll be quiet and we will open it up for discussion. Sticker and decal programs. We know that some lakes, some reservoirs, some boating areas require decals. This is not a boater registration, but an additional decal. It's like in my county, if I want to take trash to the dump, I have to have a decal that shows I'm a taxpayer in the county, and then I can drop it off for free. If I don't have that decal, I pay a fee. So we're thinking along the lines, is this something we should research? Where are these programs? How are they administered? How are they enforced? How successful are they? We certainly don't want to create a decal program or sticker program where the administration costs more than the funds being raised. So those are the items that we've brainstormed of how a fund could be spent if we had one. And now I invite anyone to contribute to the conversation on that.
Should I share the agenda and share my screen?
Sure, I'll make you a co-host. Okay. Good point.
All right, that'll give folks a reference point here. All right.
Okay, you should be able to do now.
All right, here we go. Right here. Y'all seeing that?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Yep. So I'll just kind of scroll up here. Funding
Any
comments.
comments on any of those items? We're basically looking at the first bullet item. How would ADV funding be used? Any thing there that's a red flag, or you think it's horrible or a no-brainer?
So Katie, I haven't been able, and this is Beth Lohman, and I'm with the Department of Environmental Quality in the Office of Pollution Response and Emergency Preparedness. And I was not able to attend the last work group meeting. And so I wasn't sure if you've already covered this ground or not, so I apologize. But I don't see mitigate the environmental issues of using the funding. But I would certainly add that to the list.
Excellent point. Thank you. Yes.
Katie, this is Tony with the Marine Resources Commission. I certainly think the items you put on the list are the essential elements for managing a program like this. We've looked at something similar to, for a little bit broader habitat restoration program that would have included, abandoned vessel work, and certainly recognize the need to, you got to have someone that's sort of in charge of this, running it all the time if you're going to take on a holistic program. So I think that's a big factor. One thing I will point out with regard to funding, the General Assembly a number of years ago did provide a bit of funding for work in the Elizabeth River down in Norfolk, and an inventory was done and vessels were prioritized for removal. And the money then was passed through to the local governments to contract to have the vessels removed. So I guess that might be something that comes out in the wash, but it may be that some of this work would be passing money to other entities to remove the vessels and not just contracting through this program itself. But just wanted to throw that out as sort of a past experience.
Excellent. So subcontract with local governments or different local entities, I guess, depending on who's interested in partnering with this.
Yeah, you could all, we hear from time to time certain local governments come in and say, hey, we've got this problem. derelict structures, derelict vessels, whatever it might be. And is there money to get the vessel, get that problem solved? And more often than not, there's not money, but if there were a program that could just sort of use the information from the local governments, let them take the first crack, so to speak, at the inventory and identifying the priorities, and then they could request the funding through the program sort of as a grant type system.
Excellent.
Just kind of following up on what he just said, is there, and I haven't scanned this document, so I don't know if it's covered somewhere else, but recovering the fees or recovering the funding. So if there is a derelict vessel and you can ultimately find an owner for the vessel, is there a way to recover the fees from that individual, so that you're not just relying on the annual fee or whatever?
Okay. Does anyone have any
I'll-
input on? Yeah.
I'll take a crack at that from a sense. The priority to date with our agency has been that the responsible party needs to pay to get it removed. And so it's not a matter of the state or someone else paying first and then recouping the money. We've taken the approach that the owner of the vessel who allowed it to become abandoned is responsible for removing it. That effort has met with success in some instances, and others it's ended up in court, and for various reasons the vessels don't get removed because lack of money by the owner or some other reason. But the burden of paying is we attempt to put on the owner of the vessel.
Yeah, I guess that brings up a related question too of is this program, once funded, going to actually encourage more people to abandon their vessels in order, think, hey, I paid $10 for 3 years. The state owes me to take care of my boat. So that's a big question. How do we not create an incentive for people to do the wrong thing, assuming that we still want owners to take care of their own vessels?
And that's kind of what I was thinking, is that you need to kind of keep that pressure on, that if you can identify the vessel owner, that it's not a free pathway to having your vessel taken care of.
I agree.
Excellent.
I would agree that's an issue that certainly needs to be considered and evaluated, and make sure that doesn't happen.
What kind of language could we put in the that funding source to make sure that doesn't happen? Neil Sturman with TLAC and Smith Mountain Lake Association. Because that could be a problem with people trying to just dump their boats somewhere and hoping somebody else is going to take care of that problem.
I wonder if part of that answer might come when we start looking, and of course, Anthony at William & Mary has already been taking a look at other states, but I'm wondering if other states have good language that we could borrow. Like, while it is always the responsibility of the owner to dispose of their unwanted vessels appropriately, there will be a fund for ones that are inappropriate. I don't know the right language, but I'm wondering if another state might have it.
I will certainly be looking. Hi, everybody. This is Anthony Cassato from Virginia Coastal Policy Center. I will be looking into some of what the other states are doing, and I know I've been looking for it while we've been talking, but I can't seem to find the exact code section I'm looking for. There is something in the Virginia code about if the owner can be found, putting the costs on them to remove it. I am searching right now to make sure I can actually find the correct provision. But yeah, that would be something that I don't think would be removed if we added some sort of fee to fund ADVs. So hopefully, the potential liability if you do abandon your boat could still be like a disincentive for people to keep people from, thinking they can, I'm paying for this fee, I can abandon my boat
Mhm.
if, they are still responsible for it.
Yeah, this is Jesse from Virginia Coastal Policy Center. I think you would want to craft the new provision or a new law that would basically say, this fund is to be used if the owner cannot be identified or if the owner is indigent. So you don't have it where you can just avoid paying for what is your responsibility to pay for right now under the law, which is disposal of your property. So yeah, you would want to make it so that it kind of only bridge the gap of where funding isn't available, whether through someone not having the money and being able to show that in court, or being unable to find the owner of a boat, which, I mean, you could say that drives the incentive to abandon a boat without the numbers on it and things like that. And there might be ways to, I don't know if there's technology forthcoming that will, have like a blockchain identifier on a boat that you can't just get rid of. But that's all yet to be seen.
So I actually found the code section I was looking for. It's section 15.2-9093, or part 3. But the problem with that is an authorizing statute from the state to give localities the power to make their own ordinances about controlling ADVs. So it doesn't actually, so, they can, if a locality was to have, if we went, give the localities the power to do this, they could enact a law that would charge the owner if they could find the owner with the cost of removing the vessel. But it's not the current, that's not like currently in effect. Localities need to do that themselves.
Yeah, I like Jesse, your point that the owner pays unless they're found to be without any resources. We certainly heard just about from every other state that often the reason these boats become abandoned and derelict is exactly the people have no money. There's no resources there. So it might be interesting to make sure that whatever law we craft doesn't put too much time and energy into getting to the point where we understand these people have no money. I think we heard last week with the Laws and Policy Subcommittee, one of the states says that ADVs that are valued at less than $100, so we're talking, burned out, half sunken junkers, a different set of rule applies. And maybe that could be part of this solution too.
This is more, I have more of a question for this group. I have to be honest that even though I work out of Richmond, I sit out over on the western part of the state. I'm a mountain person, not a coastal person. So I don't know how a lot of the entities operate out on the coast. But we've been looking at some models in transportation related incidents, like on the interstate systems, and how we keep, so there's a disruption to the traffic flow on the interstates. We need to clear up that incident as quickly as possible to reduce the impacts to the public. And so we've been looking at funding models that keep those costs privatized versus externalizing them to the public side. So, VDOT has stood up this program where the towing community gets assigned a certain segment of the interstate, and they're obligated to respond to the tractor trailer incidents. And then they deal with those tractor trailer incidents and deal with the trucking company to recover the cost for clearing up the interstate. Unless it overwhelms the tow operator's capacity and the state has to step in, we keep those costs on the private side. So one of the things that I was wondering is if we could kind of approach this policy in the same way. How do we not externalize the cost? How do we kind of keep it on the private side? So I don't have any specific ideas. I just kind of wanted to share that model. It seems as an interesting idea.
Okay, great. Good model to look at. Any other
Yeah, I will
thoughts or-
say,
Mhm.
oh, sorry, Katie. I was just going to say, we did talk about that a little bit the last meeting, which is that when you find an abandoned automobile, you can actually get money for it. So like maybe $200 scrap metal, whereas a boat, the whole idea is to identify it before it sinks, because once it does, it's super expensive to pull up, but also it's virtually worthless and it actually costs money to dispose it. So that's why I would think maybe adding to the list, and I was trying to think where this would fit into the priorities you have listed, but some sort of identification of at-risk boats. But I think that kind of ties in with like an outreach or education or identifying inventory generally of where boats are that seem like they might be abandoned or might become derelict. So that might be like outreach to marina owners or local governments or law enforcement. But yeah, I'm not sure how that fits in and if that's its own little bucket or not.
Well, that's great, Jesse. Thanks for mentioning that. And actually, Florida has an at-risk program that we could learn from. So great. Add it to the list.
Is that with the vessel turn-in, the voluntary vessel turn-in?
Nope, that's a
Nope.
different program. The at-risk program educates Coast Guard and water police on how to identify a boat that looks like it's on its way. You know, the running lights aren't on, or it's been moored in one place for a very long time. And it's an outreach program that is I think fines are involved, but as a last resort, it's more like, hey, buddy, looks like your boat's getting kind of old. Do you know we have this turn-in program? So it's a way to reach out to owners of boats that look like they're in trouble, and let them know about what options there are, and let them know the laws too. You know, you should have your lights on, and you don't have lights on, so you're a navigational hazard.
Would that
So,
be through
yeah.
law enforcement, or would that be private citizens doing that, or both?
What I know about the Florida program, it's all law enforcement, but I don't know if Jesse or Anthony, if you've talked to Florida yet, if you know more about that, but I heard it was all law enforcement.
We haven't talked to them directly yet, but that's the impression I got looking into it, was it was all law enforcement. And we're talking about saving money. I think that would be, that would probably be a good use of money, because if you can identify these boats before they're actually derelict or sunk, that's gonna, that it's gonna be significantly easier to deal with a boat that's not actually derelict or abandoned yet than it would be, once the owner's gone and
Right.
can't be found.
Yeah, California did say that the turning in of a vessel costs 1/3 as much as when a vessel is abandoned, because a lot of that is finding the owner and all that time and energy, and then actually getting the boat to a marina. If somebody will get a boat to a marina, it's much more cost effective. So maybe, Neil, what you were talking about, where a boater can talk to a boater, would be more under the education and prevention programming. You know, maybe we can have a boater to boater communication guide or something like that.
Of course, it's a lot less expensive, as somebody mentioned, if you turn in before it submerges some, 20 feet, and then it's a lot harder to get out of the water, as we have in some instances in Smith Mountain Lake. So.
And I'm not sure
Right.
who all was here, but we mentioned, Major Meyer from North Carolina has mentioned they spent 10% of their available budget to remove one sunken vessel. So, that, you think there's probably more than 10 sunken vessels. So you're either going to need more money, or you're going to need to find a way to get that money, or to more efficiently use that money.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other comments? And we can come back to this at the end if something else pops in your head. And I'll remind you all, please do add your name and affiliation in the chat box. But if there's no other comments on how we would spend money, if we had it, then we can go to the next topic, is how would we get money? So last call for any other contributions on the first topic. Okay. Well, then let's move to the next agenda item. And it was about sources of funding. what are the different ways we can fund a program? And the 4 items that I listed on the agenda, one is grants. The only grant I know of that focuses on this is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's has a program, the Marine Debris Program, and they have almost annual grants for removal programs, but they're not meant to be a year after year after year funding source. And I think the highest number of dollars they give is about 300,000. But I did look and I saw that some past NOAA grants supported development of programs. So that's a possibility if this committee can figure out what are some barriers we need to overcome and what we might be able to get some startup money for a program from NOAA. Does anyone else know of any other grant programs that might be interested in helping Virginia get a program going? Okay, I know I looked into Boat US Foundation, but I did not see any large, I mean, their grants are like $3,000. Okay, well, the next thing, possible funding is appropriations from the General Assembly, which is what they've done in North Carolina twice, once for $1 million, and now they're working on a second appropriation of $2 million. And as Tom told us, the state of Virginia appropriated $1 million a few years ago for a targeted issue in a targeted area, the Elizabeth River. Does anyone want to comment from your own experience how likely it is that the General Assembly might be worth asking for any funding?
This is Tony again from the Marine Resources Commission. Along those lines, yes, you're correct. There was an appropriation for the Elizabeth River in the past. I know the last few years within the General Assembly, there's been an attempt to allocate a couple $100,000 for removal of actually one vessel up, and I think it's in the Neabsco Creek. It's an old barge there, but it has not been successful in terms of that funding going through. And I would say, going back to the previous bullet on the grants itself, we actually tried applying for grants from NOAA for that same derelict barge, and we weren't successful. So it's a very competitive grant program, I believe. And so it's kind of difficult to get funding through that process. You got to have a very significant threat to the environment to get those kind of funds. But the General Assembly appropriations have been made in the past, but there hasn't been much, or there has been reluctance for that, it seems like, based on some recent requests for funding.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I should also point out that the NOAA marine debris grants require a 1-to-1 match. So if somebody in Virginia got 150,000, we would have to come up with 150,000 match.
Hi, everyone. This is Christy Kehoe speaking with NOAA Marine Debris Program, and just kind of wanted to chime in and thank you all for allowing me to participate here and really learn more on a localized and state level the issues you're going with. And want to thank those that may have also applied to our annual community-based removal grants that we do on an annual basis. I know, as was indicated, they've gotten quite competitive. Historically, we've focused on mid to large scale debris. So that certainly includes abandoned and derelict vessels. And to Katie's point, it certainly has a 1-to-1 match. And the typical funding amount at the lower end is $50K, but it does go into around $250K to $300 at times. I would say on the normal side, it is a 2-year grant timeline. There is a possibility for a 12-month extension depending on extenuating circumstances, but typically we don't really fray too much from that timeline. But that being said, it is something that we do regularly, and I know I'm in close contact with this group, and I'll certainly share when those announcements are made. But as far as this year is concerned, we will have the announcements for both removal and the grant competition made available late this summer. with the applications and letters of intent going through fall. Again, really want to, thank the folks on this call that may have applied in the past. And, for the better part, it has, there's a lot more interest in our grant competition, but that just means it's a little bit harder to get funding. So if anyone has any questions or wants to learn any information, certainly reach out to me anytime and I'd be happy to help. And I think that's it for me, but thank you all.
Thank you, Christy. Actually, I'll point out here too, that at our next meeting of the entire work group, we're going to have a speaker from Rhode Island who has been successful, I think twice, certainly at least once, getting one of these NOAA removal grants, focusing on options for recycling or have a use for fiberglass hulls. So he'll be talking about the research they've done. And so I think that will be very pertinent to this committee as well. Any other thoughts? Yes.
Good.
Well, I just wanted to see if there's any other focused comments about possible grants or the possibility of appropriations for the General Assembly before we get to a bigger topic, which is the possibility of fees on boats, fees on boaters.
I just had a question. A power company, AEP, pretty much governs some of the inland waterways, Smith Mountain Lake, I think Lake Anna also. And I wonder if we could apply for any grants through them. I know they do have some grants, and I don't know if anybody's from AEP is on the call. We could reach out to them and see if they could, we could do any grants through them.
Great possibility. And of course, Dominion is with owns Lake Anna or portion of it. And I think part of Lake Cheston. So that's a great idea, is the power companies that run some of these lakes. Great, thank you. If there's no other comments on those topics of potential grants or potential appropriations from the General Assembly, the next item is the possibility of fees on boats or fees on boaters. We've already heard that this cannot be sold as in addition to a registration fee, or that will endanger a $2 million grant that the state of Virginia gets every year. So it would have to be a different program. So I thought we would spend a few minutes talking about this, and especially those of you on this phone call who are boaters, who are familiar with decal programs or sticker programs where you pay a fee. So what are people's thoughts about this? Oh, and I'm sorry, I was supposed to share with you something. We couldn't get a speaker from California, but I spoke with the boat administrator of California back in August, and he said that they fund their ADV program from several sources. A little bit of the California gas tax. The gas taxes in California are very high, and a portion of those go to their ADV program. I think they figured out how many gallons of gas are sold to boaters as opposed to people who drive cars, and they come up with a formula there. And then they do have an extra fee that boaters pay that he said is fairly well received with boaters, because California has made it clear that the money that they're paying goes right back into the boating community. It doesn't get siphoned off into some general fund. And he said they have not had resistance from boaters to pay the fee. I do not know what it is, though. I don't know how much that is. He said right now, these two sources are $2.75 million a year, and it is not enough to address their problem. He also said that their program only applies to recreational vessels, that commercial vessels, there's a different approach for funding end-of-life commercial. So I just wanted to share that with you, and that's how California, at least, is raising money. So let's have a discussion. What do you all think about the feasibility of pursuing a fee on boaters?
So Katie, I was gonna I was going to make the suggestion along the same lines of what you just recommended that they're doing in California, because we have, our Virginia Petroleum Storage Tank Fund is funded by a tax per gallon of fuel sold at the loading racks of bulk fuel facilities. And so I didn't know if any portion of that could be either that tax could be increased and then some percentage of that be directed towards this program, or the additional tax at the pumps at the docks kind of
Could
thing.
you repeat the name of that fund?
The Virginia Petroleum's Storage Tank Fund.
Okay, good. Thank you.
That's the fund that we use to address petroleum related pollution. So, we've had a couple of incidents recently out on Smith Mountain Lake, and we use the petroleum fund to mitigate the fuel release from a sinking vessel there. Those funds can't be used to remove the vessel, but they can be used to address the petroleum release. So,
Are there also funds through the EPA for that?
I'm sorry, funds through the what?
EPA?
So there is an ability, it's the same fund that the Coast Guard has access to. So it's the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. And so they probably, for very small releases that are just creating a nuisance sheen in a marina, EPA would probably not get involved in something like that. But if it's a larger vessel in the coastal community, the Coast Guard could access the liability trust fund and open up the fund to address the petroleum piece. But they still run into the same issue of removing the vessel once the environmental piece has been mitigated.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with the one at Smith Mountain Lake you're referring to.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Pete Francisco with the Coast Guard. Definitely want to concur with what was just said. The Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, we have used that for certain vessels to address the pollution aspect, and just like what was said, often that doesn't resolve the actual vessel disposition. Sometimes, like if we have to refloat a vessel to remove the petroleum products, we're able to find another agency or partner who can take advantage of the situation when it's afloat to take it at that time. Otherwise, we have to lower it right back into position, which is unfortunate. But that's the authority that we have, and we're very limited by that. So, it does create those opportunities for discussion when, when we have those cases come up, and sometimes we are able to affect success by someone being able to take it at that time, but that's really an ad hoc type of scenario. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just to follow on what Peter just said, that is something that we've tried in the past, and Neil, especially on the Smith Mountain Lake issue, is we offered to raise the boat and pump off the fuel, and while we had it raised, have the tow company, Sea-Tow, remove the vessel and try to combine efforts so that we're not duplicating that. So just combining funds for different purposes and trying to be efficient with the actions.
I guess this is for you, Beth. Does the vessel actually have to be leaking fluids to get funded for that? It does. I guess
I'm sorry, Beth, you said yes, they actually have to be.
I do that at least once a meeting, forget to unmute. That's correct. We would not take action if the vessel's not leaking.
So even if you knew that oil or gas was on the vessel, it has to leak?
Yeah, we're going to exercise as much pressure as we can on the vessel owner to raise and deal with the environmental issues. So until it actually becomes a threat, we won't take any action.
Okay, great, thanks.
Beth, quick question, sorry to follow up. When you all said you called CETO, was that, did you all have all the coordinate with DWR as well in the titling? Or, because I know that's sort of the middle step. Okay.
Yeah, so we were in touch with DWR to make sure that's how we got in touch with the vessel owners. We went through their licensing program. We have access to their database, so we can look up the owners. The owner was out of state in the Smith Mountain Lake case. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
From what I understand, they're still looking for that person and trying to, I guess, serve them with summons or something like that to get them to act. That's that 42-foot boat you're referring to, correct? You did place booms around it when it was leaking, I believe. I
We
spoke to
did.
somebody at DEQ.
Yeah.
You know, we're actually looking for case studies for a document that will be produced by this work group. So it sounds like we should get with both of you and learn more about that as a case study, you know, just how long it took and how it's not yet resolved, it sounds like, and all that. But if I could, just in the sake of honoring our time commitment, I'd like to hear some opinions about whether the people on this call think that pursuing some kind of fee, an annual fee perhaps, on boaters that perhaps is paid at the same time as a registration, perhaps not. But what are the thoughts? Is this something that might be feasible?
Sure. I don't know, is Tom Guess on the call? I guess he's, no. He had some idea for that.
Yeah, he's not on the call.
Yeah. What
Tom
he-
Betts is the boat administrator for the state of Virginia.
Yeah, he just said to make it separate from the boat registration. Don't attach it to that, and make it specific for derelict, ADV mitigation cleanup. And he said somebody said something about Lake Anna, a user fee for lake requirement, user fee requirement. I don't know if that could be done.
Yeah, I guess we need to learn more about those. I've heard them called sticker programs, boat sticker, and somebody else called them decal. But I think the point is, if you're going to be using certain areas, you have to have their sticker on your vessel so that everyone knows you paid whatever fee you're supposed to pay.
I haven't seen that on Smith Mountain Lake, but I'm familiar with like garbage disposal, what you're referring to.
We, when we asked the Lake Anna folks, is the Lake Anna Civic Association to be specific, and they said there's a lot of folks that were not residents or didn't even live in one of the 3 counties that surrounds the lake, and a lot of holiday summer boaters. So Neil, in your experience, has that been a similar problem of just overuse by folks that aren't really paying for the free ride and use of the lake?
Yeah, we do have a lot of, I don't know, out of state people from North Carolina or West Virginia and maybe up north that don't live full time on the lake. But we don't have any kind of user fee or decal system over here, program over here for that. So there really isn't nothing that, would help with ADV that we've come across anyway. So.
Well, it sounds to me like we need to do some more research on where are these programs, how do they work, and what funds are raised for what purpose. We have a couple of people on our larger work group that are boaters. I mean, one guy said that he's basically on the water 300 days a year. So it sounds to me like we need to do some more background research on these programs. And also how other states, we know California, in fact, that there's a slideshow that I showed at our first meeting that had a list of all the states that do have a boater pay into program, either attached to the registration fee or done at the same time as a registration fee. So we'll do some more background research on that. But I'm not hearing anybody say they think it's a stupid, horrible idea. It's certainly, there's a lot of models in the world where the people who are contributing to a problem also contribute to a mitigation fund or a liability fund.
Yeah, Katie, I would want to know how that would work. And when I heard Mr. Guest try to explain it last meeting, I wasn't even sure if he was saying it would be a requirement. So I'm not even sure how it would work and if it would be required. He was saying it would be in addition to registration. When you're on a lake, you can kind of, see what boats are there, and you can't have these U.S. Coast Guard logged boats that are all over where I boat. I boat somewhere where I don't see many Virginia licensed boats. So yeah, I'd want to know how it would work and how you would take, how you would work in the U.S. Coast Guard cataloged vessels as well, and how they would kind of maybe just not contribute. But as we talked about, they already pay into the Virginia whatever part of the boating program they do. They already pay in some amount. I think you said $2 million. So I'm just curious how it would all work and how it would all the pieces of the puzzle would go together.
Right. Yeah, we'd also have to figure out, I've heard that on Lake Cheston, a lot of people who live in North Carolina actually bring their boats over to the Virginia side of the lake to avoid a fee that they've got in North Carolina. So I don't have details on that, but yeah, lots of moving parts, especially like you say, people who register their boats with the Coast Guard and not within the state.
Someone also mentioned when you first purchase a vessel, that to be some kind of fee attached to that purchase. I don't know anything about that, but somebody did bring that up.
Yeah, that's what Maryland does, a 5% surcharge on the purchase of a new boat, which
And that's-
actually I've read that some boat makers support that. I don't think boat sellers support it. So yeah, that's a good point. I'll add that to our list of possibilities. That's not even on our list yet. Surcharge at time of purchase.
And
Yeah,
that goes
I think they call it an excise tax.
Excise, thank you. You're right.
And that goes directly to ADV mitigation?
More than that, it's waterway management as well, but it does support their ADV program.
Okay.
Excise tax, okay.
Jesse and I were talking about this at some point, about how, if people in Maryland are being charged, this 5% excise tax on buying the boat, what's to stop them from buying a boat in Virginia and just driving it back to Maryland and then registering it and avoiding that tax? I think that's something we need to keep in line, especially when we're talking areas that are close to other states. Like, if Maryland and Virginia both have it, that's kind of a non-issue, but I don't know if North Carolina has something like that. It would kind of go the other way. Like, people would go to North Carolina, buy their boats, bring them back. I think that's something we would need to flag on that, to make sure people aren't just gonna get around that and, we're not getting money from it, or not getting as much money as we would hope.
Good point.
Yeah, and I think that might tie into the education component where, like if you do it and Maryland's doing it, then the boat, sellers can say, oh, come to us because it's gonna be the same price anyway. So yeah, I am curious about that. There are Commerce Clause considerations whenever you deal with, or I guess it's dormant Commerce Clause considerations when you deal with things like that and trying to stop people from going to a different state. So it would just have to be, okay, this is what Maryland does, this is what we'll do as well. That would be the way to approach that.
Is there a way to take a multi-state approach to this and have like a regional kind of approach? Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, or Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, or something like that?
Good question.
Sounds like a good idea.
Actually, there is already a group called the Mid-Atlantic Marine Debris Work Group. We meet every month, and it's New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia. And they're actually watching us. They're watching Virginia and what we're doing with all of these ADV discussions to see if there might be something that they could also go along with. But yeah, you would think if everyone on the East Coast had the 5% excise tax at purchase, it would eliminate any advantage or disadvantage.
Yeah, I don't think they could do that explicitly agree to the same tax. But yeah, again, I'm thinking of these dormant commerce clause considerations, but it would be something where the states could all come together and say, we want to funnel this money to this issue, and we all agree to pay for it, and we're all agreeing that we are getting the money from somewhere. But yeah, as far as putting a sales tax of the same amount or something like that, if it gets tricky with the dormant commerce clause, which is essentially you can't control what someone does in and out of your state. So like I can go and buy, bread across the line or something like that. There is something Oregon does. I'm trying to think of it. I think I can't remember how they avoid it. I think they require you to show you live in Oregon for them not to charge you sales tax, something like that. But anyway, there are ways to get around it that are, it's essentially just making it so that you have to show where you live. But that's all to say that it's another consideration and we should be mindful of. But yeah, I think the states could certainly come together and say, we want to tackle this issue and each provide this amount of funding.
Okay. Great. Other comments, thoughts about funding from any source, from either boater fees or aligning with other existing funds? I mean, I know in North Carolina, they did say that some of their ADV expenses are covered from a waterways management fund. I don't know if Virginia has a fund with unexpended money left over that could be seen as a good match for dealing with this issue. Anybody else out there know of a fund that's already in existence that would have parallels to this one, to our issue?
Well, that brings a question. Should we have some lawmakers or legislators on the calls to tell us what they do have on the books and what we maybe could do?
Well, I guess I'd argue that's why we have the Virginia Coastal Policy Center represented in our calls. They are lawyers, but at some point, yes, we're going to have to probably engage legislators, and that brings up another thought, something that I think Beth mentioned. If this committee, this work group, does lean towards suggesting an excise tax, for example, will that build automatic resistance for any policy changes from the boat sales community? So we do have to think about how feasible it is to get recommendations passed and not make enemies, I guess.
One funding stream, it wouldn't be a routine funding stream, but a possibility when we do, in our environmental response, we have that Virginia Petroleum Storage Tank Fund that we can use for environmental response where petroleum is involved. We also have our Virginia Environmental Emergency Response Fund, the VERF fund, which we use for non-petroleum response. The VERF fund is funded through our civil charges. So when we have a significant compliance issue and we engage our enforcement division to resolve those compliance issues, we do that through a consent order and charge a civil charge. So that instead of that money going into the general fund, it goes into our VERF fund, and that's what we use for environmental response. And so when we negotiate these civil penalties with folks, they can offset I think it's up to, I can't remember the ratio, is it 70% or up to 30%? I think it's probably up to 70%. They can offset up to 70% of the civil charge with a supplemental environmental project, a SEP. And so I'm thinking if you were to have a large coastal incident, fuel spill or something like that, where you're talking about a significant civil charge, someone could potentially offset the up to 70% of that civil charge with a supplemental environmental project. And so that money could be used to seed a program for, there just needs to be a nexus in media or a nexus in pollutants or something like that between the compliance issue and the program that it's funding or where the funds are being directed to. So.
Sounds great. Thank you. We'll probably call you more details.
Would commercial vessels have some kind of liability issues with because you said a large spill? They would probably cause a large spill other than a recreational boater. Do you approach it differently with commercial vessels?
There's an enforcement process. There's a kind of a methodology that the enforcement staff work through to arrive at a civil charge. So it's typically driven not on the basis of the size of the entity or whether they're private or commercial, but on the significance of the environmental impact. So does that answer your question?
Do they have insurance, commercial vessels to cover any spills? Any kind of insurance for that?
There is insurance, and they have different riders or different policies. And I'm not an insurance expert, but there are liability policies. There are pollution policies, and so they cover different things, and they're contingent upon whether something's an act of God or accidental or negligence or things like that. But now I'm beyond what I know about that. So.
Sure. Thank you.
Beth, when you say significant, some of these fines or charges, are you talking in the multi-millions of dollars?
No. And so I think these things will be infrequent, but if you have oil impact, under the Oil Spill Act and or the Oil Pollution Act, and under this Article 11 of the State Water Control Law, there's strict liability. So if you cause oil to be released, you're responsible for that. And so we have guidelines for different scenarios as to when we kind of elevate something to an enforcement response where we do a civil charge. And again, there's a matrix and it's too complicated to get into, but it can be thousands, it could be tens of thousands. We have had hundreds of thousands. We have had $1 million type civil charges. Those larger value cases are very rare, but they do happen. So
I guess what I was thinking is, while this might be part of the mix, it would not be sustainable funding at the levels that we are guessing we would need in Virginia, but maybe part of the mix.
No, it could be just a kind of an infusion of cash from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts or questions or observations on possible sources of funding to support a program?
The excise tax was on the purchase. What about the fiberglass industry? In some of the other conversations that we've talked about, and I don't know if Renee McKinnon has shared with you, Katie, but we've been doing some discussions internally about, on the initial call that we had for this work group, for the larger work group, disposal challenges were brought up. And so we've been talking about that internally, and we've got some feedback on that piece. But one of the things that I heard is that there was a challenge about that fiberglass was a particular problem. So what about the fiberglass industry? Is there a way to tap them for funding?
We'll put it on the list. I actually did see an interview with a president of a boat boating company who was saying that they have to step up, that the boating industry realizes that they're making products that at the end of their life have huge disposal issues. And he personally thought that the boating industry, not so much fiberglass, but boating industry should step up and take some responsibility. So we'll have to find that article. But that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Getting corporate, what's that usually called, extended producer responsibility or extended producer liability, very unpopular with industry, those kind of laws, but more and more, I think people are looking at that. So yeah, we'll write it down on the list.
So,
Good idea.
sorry, I want to mention, France actually does something like that on their national level. Like they charge all their boating manufacturers some sort of tax that goes into funding their ADVs. And I think the problem that I think we would face doing that is I'm not sure it'd be possible to do that at the state level. I don't know how many boat manufacturers we have in Virginia. So that would be, I think, something that the federal government would have to do. Just because, as Jesse was mentioned, that would bring up some commerce clause issues, because those boats manufacturers, I'm going to assume, are crossing state lines pretty frequently.
Mm.
And so, that would be awesome. A cool idea. And then I don't know what Coast Guard could distribute that money through some grants or however that money would then be distributed to actually tackle ADVs. But I think that'd be above the state level.
Well, that'd be great
Yeah.
if your white paper would include recommendations on things that would be better on a regional or federal level. Because we've run into this before, that Virginia is not California. We just don't have the market power or the population to pass some laws that a state like California could. So yeah, that'd be great. And somebody else was going to
Yeah, I can include that.
Thanks. Does somebody else have a comment along those lines of what's appropriate at the state level or federal level?
I was going to jump in and say that I think that's ultimately going to be the best solution, because we have ways now of, calculating, okay, this fiberglass is going to eventually cost X amount of dollars to dispose of. And there should be some sort of a cost that goes to the manufacturer of the boat, which, it might get passed on to whoever purchases the boat. That's probably how it would work. But regardless, there should be a fee tied to the actual manufacturer of these vessels, because this is becoming such an issue.
Mhm.
And there's such a, problem with getting people to dispose of these boats, and it's just going to get worse and worse. I think fiberglass boats only really took off in the 60s as, the main type of boat. So yeah, this is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. And so yeah, Anthony, that would be great if we could include that. As you mentioned, I think France either already does it or they were considering it. But yeah, that's got to be something that goes into the mix of dealing with this issue going forward.
I've also heard of some extended producer responsibility laws that require all manufacturers to take back their products at the end of the useful life. And I
Yeah,
think
RCRA.
yeah, exactly. Like in carpeting, there's some places on earth that when you're done with the carpeting in your house, you can call the company that you bought it from and they have to take it back. And but that, back to Beth's question, might the fiberglass industry be willing to help fund a project that was looking at solutions? Because they would probably would rather fund a project looking at solutions than gets stuck with extended producer responsibility. So that might be worth looking into.
Yeah, trying to find a recycling program or some use for the materials afterwards. That's another thing that we did talk about, Anthony, myself, and Elizabeth, last time we talked about this issue, is trying and someone was saying that that's something they do in Rhode Island already. I had not heard that. That's interesting.
Well, actually, Christy Kehoe, are you still on? Could you give a brief summary of what they're doing in Rhode Island with their grant project?
Hey, Katie, I will do my best. I will say Evan is by far the expert. I know everything you're mentioning. There's a lot of complexities, especially with logistics and supply chains. And I know as far as regionally that with the fiberglass recycling program in Rhode Island, I know they are connected with a South Carolina concrete facility. And it's through that partnership that I think they're able to export the fiberglass and materials down to South Carolina. And then it's there where they, process the fiberglass and turn it into concrete. I don't unfortunately know the specifics on, the funding aspects and whose actually role is what and who to, when, the supply chain of it all. But I do know it's quite complicated. That doesn't really help the situation other than just more things to think about.
Right, and it's just a pilot that they're working on. But
Right, exactly.
Evan will be speaking, Evan from Rhode Island will be speaking on March 3rd at our next meeting with everybody. That is March 3rd, right?
Yeah, and Evan's fantastic and has way more information on the specifics of the how, what worked, what didn't work that they thought was going to work, and all of that. But I do think that, at least on the East Coast, I'm excited to see if there's maybe any potential with Virginia and the work that's happening, that we can connect in with.
But to Jesse's point, this is becoming a worldwide issue as these boats are becoming 20, 30, 40 years old. So yeah, there might be some funding out there for another pilot program looking at solutions.
Yeah, I think to the point of maybe this being kind of the right place, right time for it. I know at least on a marine debris program level, it's something that we've been increasingly been asked about what options are out there, or like, what do I do with this? So I think there's a lot more interest paying attention to this issue, which maybe we can leverage for Virginia.
Any other comments, thoughts? Got some great new stuff here. Well, if not, you know how to reach us. And we do have more meetings, of course, coming up, including March 3rd, which will be the next meeting of the entire work group. And that will be 10 a.m. And a Zoom link has been sent. I sent it to everybody this morning. So I guess at this point, let's turn it back over to Jeff for next steps.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everyone, for their contributions and comments. I thought this was a really productive meeting, and got a lot of next steps for us to do as kind of our mini team to do. But I just wanted to kind of give a quick update on some of the economic case studies we had mentioned earlier, potential to have interviews. We've actually had some folks with marinas that we've reached out to, that we've distributed that survey to through Ed Tillett, and we've had some requests to say, hey, I'm willing to be interviewed. So we're going to have some of those stacking up pretty soon, and we'll be sharing those updates, not the details, but just sort of higher level, non-personal, identification, kind of keep them private, but just to kind of say, here's what we learned, here's how we're ground truthing things with the boating community. So just expect that to be a regular part of the agenda going forward. And then Mitchell Sherry with Clean Virginia Waterways is also going to be digging around for some of that economic impact data, and that's something that came up in a previous interview with the marina, that just their opportunity costs of slips being tied up, and just the time that it takes to track down these folks, and then to even rewrite some of the policy language for their leases that came up in the policy subcommittee meeting last week, and how do we do that? Where are the resources? Why is it so hard to find the stuff online? Who's the right point of contact? So those are background sort of added value things we're going to do in addition to William & Mary's white paper, in addition to creating that inventory that will be made public and continue to be updated through that survey. So those are kind of the next steps just on my end. And then I guess kind of going to the next segment of the agenda, if you don't have any questions about that, or any updates I should ask too, from folks here just in general that you want us to be aware of. Anything? So if no, I just wanted to ask, has the doodle poll been easy to use? Has it been the best way to get in touch to get everyone's availability? If not, is there another way that we can schedule these meetings? Hey, Neil.
Seems to work for me.
Okay. Great. Well, if nobody has any objections really to that, we've been trying to space these things out. As we recall, the first overall group meeting was January 5th. The next overall group meeting will be March 3rd. So that's, every 2 months, or every other month, excuse me. And then we've had the policy group that's February 10th that's already met. And then mid-March is going to be when we schedule the next meeting. And some of you already responded to that poll. So this is kind of third week February type of thing. Does that seem like it would fall maybe late March to kind of just keep this up, or is there anything? And again, we try to get the most folks there, but then if it's a specific topic, we love to have folks at VMRC and DWR too, if there's an important policy question or a funding thing that we really need answered. So that's kind of our approach. So that's fine and that's working. I will send out a doodle poll promptly to kind of get us on a monthly basis, I guess. Katie, is that what we're thinking? Monthly for the subcommittees?
Initially, we thought that the law and policy and the funding committees should probably meet monthly, at least for the first few months, because they're the big ones. Those are the two big committees that have a lot of heavy lifting. Maybe later in the year, we can go back to, or go to every other month. And as you said, there's a lot of background research we need to do between now and our next meeting. Like I would like to get a lot more details on all the states that I saw reference to that have fees. It'd be really good to find out how much they are and all the details before, as much as possible before our next meeting. But it sounds like late March would give us time to do that.
Okay, late. Got it. All right. Well, as always, feel free to contact us, provide suggested agenda items. I know kind of our theme has been bringing in guest speakers for different states and lessons learned, and that seems like a good model. But if there's something that you guys really, you have a colleague who can really speak to a specific point or something that's, I know Christy mentioned, other folks and have more specific knowledge, we are always welcome and open to have that, and we can adjust the agenda accordingly to make sure those needs are met. So.
Okay, so a recording of this will be on our webpage in a few days or hours maybe. And then a summary will follow and you'll get a doodle poll so that we can determine our next meeting date in late March.
And look at that, we're ending early. There's
Yes.
your Friday treat.
Yay. Thank you all for being with us today, and email us with any thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a great weekend.
Great day.
Bye-bye.
See everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.